Hello, everyone. This is Vern Davis. I am your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is brought to you proudly by Produce Global. Look, my guest today co-founded a business that works in facilitation consultancy dedicated to the service of the cannabinoid industry. This business was formed following the identification of an absolute need for those within the industry to have easy and simplified access to the necessary range of professionals, each with years of regulatory, scientific experience behind them. This consultancy is led by Mr. Steve OIiver. He's the co-founder of the Canna Consultants. And welcome, Steve, here to our show on Plant Profits today.
Thank you very much, Vernon. I'm honored to be a guest. It's great to talk to you. Big fan of Plant Profits, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Same, man. I am very much looking forward to the groundwork that you and your team have done, and the different countries in the world. So, right now, you are where?
Okay, so right now I'm in London. I'm in the UK.
Yeah. Okay.
Just come back from some cultivation in Greece and North Macedonia, and a few days back in the UK before we're on the road again.
Okay, and typically your work is done in what geography? Is it all UK, European, or are you in South America? Where are you?
Okay, pretty much we're global. I mean, we would like to be based in the UK more, but as we probably come on to, the UK is quite restrictive. So we worked in Sub-Saharan Africa, we worked in South America, we worked in places as diverse as Armenia, Malta, Greece, and the States.
Right, great. So let's just back up for the audience and just really talk about what Canna Consultants is all about, Steve. And because the journey to get to where you are today is very intriguing about the path that you took personally, and then you have built a team around some core competency needed for the industry.
Okay. The backstory for me goes back to about 1988. So I'm one of the few people that's been in and around cannabis, and I can honestly say that for over 30 years. Probably not in the way that people would imagine, but I started off in drug enforcement, and I went through a phase of undercover work, which is a young man's game, and I spent 11 years doing that around both cannabis and Class A drugs. So I know firsthand the war on drugs just doesn't work. I was disillusioned as a young man, and then my path took me into sort of regulatory legal background, and I worked in Europe heading up an environmental law consultancy and working for KPMG. And the big thing then was we were helping a lot of companies on the other side of the pond, stateside, who were looking to come into Europe. And at that stage, great, Europe's this massive market. And then they realized that you've got, at that stage, 23 different countries with disparate laws, no harmonization, and a patchwork of regulation.
Right.
Move forward, it's not too dissimilar now with cannabis. But I got back into cannabis when my mother was terminally ill with Alzheimer's disease. And really, there was very little treatment available. She had what's called bruxism, where you grind your teeth away. She didn't know who I was. Yeah. But the solution was to remove her teeth, and I thought there has to be an alternative. So at that stage, there were no CBD oils on the market, but in Holland, they were selling cannabis extracts, which were high CBD, and I acquired some, and it was miraculous. So you could see that it alleviated some form of inner anxiety that was still remained within my mother. And at that point, I was sold. And I started to look at...
When was that, Steve?
Yeah, that would have been 2014, 15.
Okay.
Okay. And it was clear to me that there was just a lack of any form of structure. And that's on both sides. So people were selling products which were purporting to be illegal, but they were being made in kitchens, so you didn't know what they contained. There were no COAs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The regulators didn't know what to do. And my co-founder, Matthew Lawson, is a regulatory barrister still working in and out of the courts. And I said, look, we need to look at the legal framework here and identify what can and can't be done. So we started off looking at the laws around controlled cannabinoids here, THC, delta-8-9. And there were trade associations and lawyers providing false information. I think they genuinely believed it, but they were giving people the foundation blocks for businesses, which were just leaving them open to drugs legislation. So we got into the Canna consultants by identifying a need. And what we first thought was we'd create like the bat phone. So we thought what we'd do is we'd create this red telephone for businesses. So they would pay an insurance premium to us. And when the shit hit the fan, or when the regulators came with that letter landed, they'd call in. I'm not sure. I'd like to say I was the Batman, but Matt probably wouldn't like it. But that would be the service. But there was no enforcement. You know, Vernon, there was no enforcement, and that just wasn't the way. So we started to look at the legislation, and then we got
wait a minute. Hold on before you get there. So you and Steve, you guys created a business, and it was almost like a phone booth. Yeah. So I got into trouble. I need help.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was totally reactive and not proactive.
It was that, but it then became absolutely proactive, because when the phone rang, it was, how do I get into this? How do I do this? What is the law? Why can't I get a bank? How can I get investment? And then we had this diverse range of people contacting us, and that included governments. So our first major gig was a government saying, we want to implement legislation to allow for the cultivation and provision of medicinal cannabis, not recreational. How do we do that? So we had this strange situation that we went from looking at protecting people from regulators and governments to initially working with them and developing a framework. So it was, the evolution of the consultancy itself was upside down. I think that's the best way to say it.
Right. Yeah. And so what happened after you dove into this thing and you start engaging people through this phone booth kind of service, and you could start to turn it into a more proactive situation? When did you decide to put your team together?
I think we realized that we needed to overstaff it when we had a situation when the UK was still part of Europe in 2018-19. They classified CBD as being a novel food. So it's this construct which means that they deem it unsafe. So you've got grass, which is generally regarded as safe. The attitude of regulators in Europe and the UK is everything's generally regarded as unsafe until you can prove to us it is. So they put this huge regulatory obstacle in front of companies that were already providing services. So that's when the team grew. Then we realized that there was an equal gap in medicinal cannabis. And unlike the States, medicinal cannabis is totally insulated here. So we have no we have no recreational use. We have lots, but none of it's lawful.
Right.
And across Europe, there is no legalization of cannabis. There is some decriminalization, but that's entirely different, because that means that the state still has the power to arrest, imprison, penalize. They just choose not to enforce it, or they enforce it selectively. But that means you can't get a bank account, you can't get a business loan, you can't operate, you can't move the goods. And it just helps organized crime and the black market. So we started looking at...
I'm familiar. Yeah.
Just another abject failure. So the business then grew, and we had, I suppose, two new areas where we had to expand. One was we had companies in Canada and America, South America, who were manufacturing isolates, distillates, and full spectrum oils for that burgeoning CBD industry. And they wanted to know how they could enter the UK and the European market. So that became the second focus. The third
is to getting these operators into Europe.
Yeah, how they can be compliant. Because at the moment, crazy as it is, we've got this huge CBD market because there's no recreational use, and yet a lot of people see the therapeutic benefit, but some people just want a piece of cannabis, and the CBD is the only way they get it here, and that's just, it's a fact. So the problem that they had, there's no license in the UK for you to actually, you can't cultivate hemp and utilize the flowers and buds. You can only use it for the shiv, stalk, and seed. So there's no industry. The people that are manufacturing are buying their ingredients from the likes of Mile High, Canna, Fabaciello. any trace THC, it's considered to be narcotics. So there's no licensing framework in the UK. So we then realized the next thing is, okay, we need to lobby, we need to engage with governments and start to bring these disparate agencies together, because crazily in the UK, and I won't limit the conversation to the UK, but it's important to understand, we have the Home Office here that deal with drugs, and cannabis falls under that as a controlled cannabinoid. And we've got this 60-year period of prohibition. So the very people that we're asking now to facilitate a new industry are the ones who demonize cannabis and still do. So we've got some old heads there that need to roll before we can bring the new blood.
Yeah.
And then you've got the food agency that's
but how are you going to do that though? I mean, how are those people going to be displaced, or how are you going to change their mind to change the dynamic in the European market?
Time is what's happening. We've seen Germany. In fact, the UK much better opportunity. Germany went through with a.
Let's do this, Steve. Let's take a break, and then I want to talk about Germany. That's the topic I want to talk about, because I could be hearing these positive waves coming out of Germany. This is Vern Davis. I'm your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is brought to you by Produce Global. My guest today is exciting. Steve OIiver. He's the co-founder of Canna Consultants, and he teaches people in other parts of the world how to get in the cannabis business legally. I think that's the best said. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is Vern Davis. I am your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is brought to you by Produce Global. My guest today, Mr. Steve OIiver. He is the co-founder of Canna Consultants, and we're just embarking on a conversation about the different markets in the European market, and we landed on Germany. Germany's been a hot topic. We hear about it here in the United States a lot about, hey, this is a gateway, maybe opportunity for cannabis and that part of the world. So, Steve, tell us what's going on there, and what can other countries learn or not learn from them?
Okay, so what's going on? Best advice for listeners: keep your checkbooks and your credit cards in your pocket, because Germany is not the new go-to country. So we had a situation. So we had an election. As with all these things, people want to win votes. So you had a coalition of parties saying, "Hey guys, we're going to legalize cannabis." And what happened? They all got voted. Well, it's no surprise that a manifesto claim doesn't always manifest itself when somebody's sitting in power. So what happened was they then made these big declarations, and we said, whoa, it's not that easy. You can't do that because you're part of the European Union and you've got the UN 61 Convention. Let's not even go there. So what's happened is, over the course of 14 months, we've got to the situation where they don't have legalization. I'm going to come back to why they don't, because that's the lesson, and that's where the solution is. But they don't have that. So they've got this cannabis club model. So it means that you can have a situation where you register as a cannabis club. Oh, there are limits on the supply. You've got to cultivate. You've got to have a security. Where you can place that is so restrictive that you're going to have to put it on an industrial estate outside of the city. So you're not going to get the footfall and not get anybody there. So essentially, we've ended up with a situation where there is no legalization of cannabis, and there is an opportunity probably for a very, very limited number of cannabis clubs where someone can go and hold 50 grams, and there's no opportunity for somebody to make money. So there's no commercial sense in doing this. And because of where they can be placed, it's not a viable business. So why did we get there? Well, we got there for two reasons. We are signatories to the United Nations, Convention on Drugs. And the first thing I'd say about that is, when you actually read the purpose of the United Nations, okay, it's to protect society. It's to protect citizens. And keep that in your mind, the protection against social harm. And then the second thing we have is the European Union, and they've got three pillars. So one's security, and then they've got free movement of people and free movement of goods. So the free movement of goods means that if you're Germany, if your neighbors have prohibition for cannabis, then there can't be any transportation, and they have a veto, they could object. So what Germany and now the Czech Republic are essentially trying to do is they need to break through two glass ceilings. And the first is, there's a human rights issue with regard to the United Nations. So we can actually argue successfully, we should be able to, as a nation, to argue successfully that the war on drugs has failed. The increase in organized crime, the black market, leads to social deprivation. it leaves people open to harm, and there is an alternative way of doing this. We've got examples. I call it the hokey cokey. I don't know if you've heard of that dance over there. We have it. You left leg. Okay, so you can go in and out of that convention. Now Bolivia did it. So Bolivia said, "Look, we're not having any of this. We've chewed the coca leaf here for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. So we are having an exemption. We're coming out. We're going back in and saying our people, because of traditional use, can chew the coca leaf." And you know what? The council said that's no problem. Why? Because they didn't think it was a threat, because no one's going to be chewing coca leaf in London or in New York, because we haven't got any, because they like making it into cocaine. And then Uruguay did the same. So Uruguay came out and went back in. So there's an opportunity to actually bypass the United Nations and stand up as a nation and say, look, drugs are doing harm, and they're doing harm not necessarily because it's physically harming somebody or smoking cannabis is bad. They're doing harm because it's a black market. They're doing harm because of crime. We've got county lines. We've got young children getting dragged into drug dealing. Why don't we legalize drugs, allow adults to make a choice? We'll protect minors, but that'll allow us to invest in neighborhoods, education, and we can protect people. But Germany didn't do that. So Germany got their votes, they got into power, and they sat back and said, this is too big a problem. It's too problematic. So, hey ho, nothing happens. And that bad news doesn't travel across the Atlantic. So the good news that came out in MJ Biz and everybody, which was correct, fantastic news. So what happens when the bad news comes out? We call it, you put the dead cat on the table. You just leave it until it's a bit quiet. Same things happen with Thailand. So Thailand, we hosted the Minister for Traditional Medicines, and they made this announcement in Thailand, again for political reasons. We're going to legalize cannabis. They had no distinction, but they had no testing facilities, and they made no distinction between what was and what wasn't lawful. So their distinction was sativa is unlawful, indica is lawful. And they gave away 1 million plants. So I don't know if you heard about this, Vernon, but they gave away 1 million plants. So you've got 1 million plants out there that people are sticking on their windows.
This is in Thailand specifically.
Thailand specifically. Yeah. Okay. So a good 100,000 of those plants were OJ Kush, White Willow. They are banging the TAC strains. And then somebody getting some hemp. And then cookies, loads of companies went shooting into Thailand, and then they found out, okay, to have a company in Thailand, Thais have to hold a majority shareholding. Right. Now there's a massive issue with the fact that they're worried that there's nothing in the legislation to protect minors. So do they allow you to grow at home if you've got kids or not got kids? So Thailand, same. Good news, fantastic message. Everybody flocked over there. Flights are now full with businessmen and businesswomen and people leaving Thailand because it's just not working. And the Thais have a fantastic history with cannabis. So their traditional medicines go back over 600 years. And this is probably for another day, but for an example, utilizing some cannabinoids for diabetes, what they've learned is that cannabis on its own wasn't efficient. So they use other traditional herbs. They've got this herb. I'm reading Andrographis paniculata. Okay, so this herb has been used for hundreds of years to treat colds. When the pandemic hit with COVID, Thai prisoners were given this herb, and they had no outbreaks in their prisons. So the Thais know about cannabis, but again, ill thought out legislation, which is easy to abuse and appeasing voters. So I think what we need is an honest conversation here, Vernon. We need to question people. If they say we're going to legalize cannabis, we don't want decriminalization. We need legalization.
Yeah. So I want to go back to Germany because, as you said, the cat's on the table and it's starting to smell, right? Yeah. So what is happening there now? What's going to happen?
Okay. So Let's go back a few years and come back. So certain areas of Germany have been really pushing for decriminalization or tolerance of cannabis and other drugs use, such as Berlin. Metropolitan Bohemian areas, very, very pro. Germany's split. So certain areas of Germany are very, very prohibitive and anti-drugs. So what's happened now is we've had the first draft of the legislation which will allow for these cannabis clubs. And a cannabis club has to be a group of people that get together in a certain area. They have a permitted cultivation, but the cultivation can only be for the people within that club. And they can't buy in cannabis. They can't supplement crop shortages or yields with a third party. And the restrictions, which your listeners can easily find. So just search for cannabis clubs Germany first draft. You'll see that to have a commercial cannabis club, there is a long list of criteria about where it can and cannot be. In fact, there's a very short list of where it can be. There's an exceptionally long list, as usual, of where it can't be. And it means that these are going to be out of town or industrial estates. And
that's your point. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
so Steve, what do you guys do? I mean, who calls you?
Okay. So we have
who do you answer the phone to? Yeah. And what do you do?
Okay. So we have American companies who at the moment fall into two categories. So we know that in America and Canada at the moment, there's an oversupply of flour. Okay, so you've got this flour. Yeah. A great deal of it is grown under GMP. So in order for cannabis flour to be used in Europe and the UK on a private prescription, it has to be GMP. So you've got this huge oversupply in Canada and America, and they now see the UK and Germany for the private prescriptions and Europe as a market. So they want to know, what regulatory boxes do we tick? How do we get our products into the UK? A lot of them were bringing flour which wasn't GMP into places like Portugal, and it was going into a pharmaceutical processing facility. Now the Germans have just said, no, you can't do that anymore. We want GMP at the point you pack the flour. So clients are finding a regulatory landscape that changes. It evolves, and there's a massive shift for medicinal. So when I say medicinal, I'm a true medicinal. So imagine it's pharmaceutical. I'm treating an identified illness. So let's say I'm trying to reduce spasticity and multiple sclerosis, or I'm trying to treat children with refractory epilepsy. You can't give the vape. So they can't smoke a joint. You can't give them a vape. They need something that looks like a pharmaceutical traditional item. So they want a tablet, they want a capsule, they want an oil, they want a patch. So we're looking at different delivery mechanisms, and there are pathways. There's the pharmaceutical pathway where cannabis is an ingredient for them to use, and then there are a lot of cannabis cultivators that want their product to enter that medicinal market. So that's a big area of business for us.
Yeah, hold that thought, because we're going to come back. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. I want to really dive into Canna Consultants, okay? And I think that's real important for our audience. Hey, I'm Vern Davis. I'm your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is brought to you by Produce Global. And my guest today is Mr. Steve OIiver, co-founder of Canna Consultants. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is Vern Davis. I am your host of Plant Profits, and my guest today is Mr. Steve OIiver. He's the co-founder of Canna Consultants. And Steve, so we were talking about, in our last segment, we were talking about what's actually going on and how do you get involved, right? What do you do for your clients? Okay, so
we've evolved. So if we're involved in cultivation space planning, so we'll help people. I'm not here to tell somebody, a master grower, how to grow plants and how to fertigate. I'm not here to tell them about transpiration, but I can help them with how you design a facility so that it's going to be regulatory compliant, so you can achieve the license. You may already have all that, and then you want to export. And let's take Canada. So you know the mechanisms with Health Canada, you know the ball ache where you've got to go through the applications, but then you've got to have an import. So we'll help you with how you're going to import that and satisfy the regulatory body. And because we've got 27 European states, we've got the UK now, we've got these emerging nations, every single different line of business is unique. So you may be familiar with the FDA, you may be familiar with GRAS, you may be familiar with Health Canada, but are you familiar with the regulatory authority in Germany or in Poland or in Sweden, for example, or in the UK? So we facilitate the business. We look at labeling, so we have elements of our team who'll help you go through the labeling, certificates of analysis, identifying the proper laboratory. So some companies don't accept American COAs. So they need to be accredited or certified from different regulatory bodies. And we'll look at product development. So if you came to us and said, we're selling a whole load of this strain and it's going out in our dispensary, we have to explain that a medical dispensary in the States is totally different to the medical market in Europe and UK. So for example, if I'm in Delaware, I go up, I pick my, I pick my 5 grams. If it's medical, I go to that. If it's recreational, I'll go to that till.
Right.
That's not how it happens. So in the UK, we have to go through a Home Office license and for the import, and then we have to have the product recognized by our Medicines Health Regulatory Authority, and it has to be approved before it can go into a dispensary, and then a clinic can issue a private prescription and that person can get the medicine. So we have such a high level, a high bar that you need to exceed before you can actually get to market. So we try and unravel all of that and hold people's hands.
And just walk them through. How long does it take? I mean, if everything is smooth, how long does that take? Yeah.
Okay. How long is a piece of string? Depends what we're dealing with. So if you've got approval and your product's already coming from the States and it's going into Germany, then it's a much quicker process to move that across to the UK. If you're a first-time entrant into Europe or the UK, it's a longer process. So it depends on consistency, quality, and the records that you hold.
Yeah.
Crazy things such as the pesticides that are tested for. Pesticides used in the US are totally different to those used in certain parts of Europe and the UK. So, a standard pesticide test may not be looking at the issues we need. Here, we like to look at PCBs, PABs, the type of dioxins, the microbial. It may be that you're doing everything that satisfies one regulator, but you need to validate that or increase the testing. And how long does it take? The more knowledge you have, the faster it is. That's what I would say.
Yeah. So where's most opportunities for you now? Where are you finding that you and the team are spending most of your time?
I think the market's changed. So if you were a cannabis business pre-COVID, people were throwing money at you. Yeah. And, we had people that standing there with a kilo of bud and all of a sudden they're valuing their business at $10 million and they were getting it, Yeah. Now people want to have a little bit of a deeper dive and open the bonnet. And the war in Ukraine post-COVID, it's made investment very difficult. So what we're seeing is on two sides. We're seeing investors saying, can you have a look at this for me? So 4 years ago, I had investors in the States who were signing off for $1 million on the basis of a deck. Now they're calling us and saying, can you perform some due diligence? Can you check? On the other side, people who are looking to raise that deck with this aspirational figure in the air valuation is no longer sufficient. So we're advising people on the blocks they need to add value to the business to attract that investment. So I think that's grown. Okay.
All right. Well, what we're finding here in the States is that, I mean, to get money now, you need to show progress in the business, right? Even early stage is requiring the people. I mean, those decks are not kind of useless, worthless,
They still do work here sometimes, I mean, I still see them. You get the right C-suite on and maybe, you get some seeders, but it's.
Yeah, if you have the right people involved, you may get money because of their reputation.
Yeah, but now I think the first hurdle now is you need to obtain the license, do your groundwork, get your premises, and then you can show people that there is a real pathway to some form of return, because so many people have had their fingers burnt. So I think due diligence, looking at a business proposition and saying, is this valid on both sides?
Right. Right. And no, it's great. That's great. What do you see the size of the opportunity? Because there's 5 countries in Europe that is basically the size of the U.S. market. I mean, so it's huge opportunity.
It's a
potential.
Opportunity.
Yeah.
I think you need to be patient. I think we need to be honest. So some of the smart money or the big money that's coming in now is using medicinal as a stopgap. So they'll build their facility, they'll achieve their certifications, and they'll generate some revenue. But the moment the moment that recreational tap is turned on, and it will happen. I think it's probably 7 or 8 years away in the UK, but I think in Europe it's probably 4 to 5. Then bingo, then you do have the green rush, because at that stage, they're still going to want you to meet certain standards to grow the marijuana and to be able to sell it and sell all of the SKUs. But if you've got that infrastructure in place, all you need is the distribution. And I think the smart money here is, okay, we're in the medical space, but are we really in the medical space, or are we waiting for legalization where we are going to pivot and we're not selling our genetics then, we're going to try and capture that black market. And that's when the market in Europe will be bigger, because we've seen in the States that the problem with legal weed is it's still more expensive than illegal weed.
That's right.
Most people have a dealer that they may have used for the past 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Their consistency is happy. So how do you transition them? And we are behind you in every aspect. So another thing we try and do is learn the lessons from the US.
From the US. Yeah.
And a lot of those are mistakes, and we try and learn from you.
Well, that's great. And hopefully we become better teachers in the future.
It's fascinating to see the transition between. So we had all these heritage growers that came into Colorado. And when I was spending time there, you got guys who are absolute masters of their art. And then they come up, against the CEO who comes from a commercial background, and they want them in at 9 a.m. and they're expecting a report. And these guys are coming in with a peak on the back, about 1, stoned, but they're just getting done. And it's how you marry those two up.
It's magic. Yeah, there's a little magic involved here. You're absolutely correct, Steve. And man, I really want to thank you for being on the show today. All of us behind the scenes and in front here, we at Plant Profits really thank you, Steve. You have, as we could hear, you have a big task, and there's just a lot of gray area, a lot of things moving in your geography, in your marketplace. And hopefully, like I said, that the U.S. can be at some point a really good teacher of what to do. I think we're a damn good teacher of what not to do right now. So that helps a lot. That moves you forward. And I really thank you for joining us. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us here on the Plant Profits podcast. My guest today was Mr. Steve OIiver. He is the co-founder of Canna Consultants. And as you could hear in this podcast, that he has a big job to do. And you can download episodes of Plant Profits by going to cannabisradio.com or subscribe to all major podcast platforms and outlets, right? Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, etc. And look at Produce Global, my company, and look at us and all the social media platforms. We are there, man. Instagram, everywhere. We are there, and really, you can take a look at what we do in the market space, how we are helping to build companies, creating value, and how we're helping to change lives in what we do on a daily basis. And that's produceglobal.com. That's PROTIS global.com. Until next time, this is Vern Davis, your host of Plant Profits. Cheers.